The engine is already idling before you even realize the situation has shifted. It's a routine traffic stop, the kind everyone likes to believe will stay routine. Headlights in the rearview mirror, that slow tightening in your chest, your hand resting on the steering wheel like you've seen 100 times in videos and driver's ed courses. The officer walks up on the driver's side, not rushed, but not relaxed either. One hand near the belt, eyes constantly scanning inside the vehicle like every shadow has a story attached to it. Then it happens. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a pause in the officer's tone when their eyes drop slightly toward your waistband, your seat, maybe the center console. Are you carrying any weapons in the vehicle tonight? Or sometimes it comes softer, almost casual. Do you have any firearms on you? And in that split second, everything changes. Your mouth suddenly feels like it forgot how words are formed. Your brain races through what you've read online, what your buddy told you at the range, what some instructor said during a concealed carry class that you barely remember. You know you're legal. You know you did nothing wrong. But you also know this moment has consequences that most people never think about until they're already in it. So, let me ask you something directly. Have you ever been pulled over or approached by police while carrying a firearm, or been asked about weapons in a situation where your heart started pounding before you even answered? I want you to share that experience in the comments, because the truth is, most people don't realize how fast a normal interaction can shift the moment a firearm enters the conversation. And if you keep listening, there's something important coming later that most armed citizens never hear clearly enough. A small detail, just a few words, that has quietly protected people from turning a simple stop into a legal headache they didn't see coming. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. A lot of gun owners don't lose their rights because they broke the law. They lose control of the situation because they say the wrong thing at the wrong time. Or they say too much when silence would have been safer. Or they misunderstand what police are actually trying to determine in those first 30 seconds after a firearm is mentioned. And officers, for their part, aren't guessing for fun. They're trying to survive a situation that can turn deadly in seconds. When a firearm enters the equation, every movement gets magnified. Every hesitation gets interpreted. Every word starts building a profile of whether this is a calm, lawful carrier or someone about to become unpredictable. Most people never see that side of it until they're already in the middle of it. Now let's slow this down and talk about what is actually happening behind the officer's eyes when that question gets asked, because the question about firearms is never just a question, it's a risk assessment disguised as conversation. When an officer approaches a vehicle, they're not just thinking about the traffic violation or the reason for the stop, they're processing body language, hand placement, passenger behavior, and the interior layout of the car. A center console half opened, a glove compartment slightly ajar, a jacket draped over a seat that looks like it's hiding something underneath. These are not accusations. They're observations in a high-stakes environment where hesitation can cost them control of the scene. Now introduce a firearm into that picture, and the entire dynamic shifts. Some states require duty to inform laws, meaning if you are carrying concealed, you must disclose it immediately upon contact. Other states don't require disclosure unless asked. Some states operate under constitutional carry, where no permit is needed, but that doesn't mean the officer automatically knows you're legal or armed. Interstate travel complicates it further, because what's lawful in one state might not be treated the same way just a few miles across a border. And here's where things quietly start to go wrong for many gun owners. They assume legality equals comfort in the interaction. It doesn't. An officer hearing, "Yes, I have a firearm," is now recalibrating the entire stop. The tone changes slightly. The pacing slows down. Sometimes backup gets called not because you did anything wrong, but because policy demands it whenever a weapon is involved. That alone can make an otherwise calm driver feel like they are suddenly under suspicion, which leads to nervous movements, which leads to more caution from the officer, which feeds the cycle. It escalates without anyone intending it to escalate. Picture this. You're in a state with constitutional carry. You're legally armed. You tell the officer you have a firearm in the glove compartment. Your hand moves slightly as you point. Maybe too fast, maybe too casual. The officer reacts instantly, not aggressively, but firmly. Don't reach for it. That tone shift alone can make a compliant citizen feel like they've done something wrong. Now the heart rate spikes, breathing changes, words become shorter. The officer is watching all of this because nervousness is not illegal, but it is relevant in their risk calculation. Now imagine a different scenario. Passenger in the front seat is carrying, driver is not. The officer asks both occupants about weapons. The passenger freezes for a half-second too long before answering. That pause becomes the most important moment of the stop, even though legally nothing has been violated. That hesitation gets filed mentally as uncertainty, and uncertainty is something officers are trained to treat cautiously, and this is where most people misunderstand what is actually happening. Officers are not reacting to the firearm itself. They are reacting to control, predictability, and clarity. A gun owner who calmly, clearly, and minimally communicates often keeps the interaction smooth. A gun owner who over-explains, reaches for documents too quickly, or volunteers unnecessary details often unintentionally raises suspicion. Now let's talk about one of the most misunderstood parts of all this. Consent searches. This is where those 5 words come in that so many experienced carriers quietly rely on, not as a confrontation, but as a boundary. Because in real-world stops, officers sometimes ask questions that blur the line between casual inquiry and legal permission. Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle? Sounds harmless, especially when delivered politely. But legally, consent changes everything. Once you agree, you've opened a door that is otherwise closed without probable cause. This is where many armed citizens accidentally give up rights they never intended to surrender. They think cooperation means saying yes to everything. It doesn't, and the phrase that often protects people in these moments is simple, calm, and non-aggressive. I do not consent to searches. 5 words. No hostility, no challenge, just clarity. Because what happens in real situations is not always dramatic. Sometimes an officer still searches because they have legal justification independent of consent. Sometimes they don't. But what matters is that you did not accidentally volunteer permission out of nerves, confusion, or pressure. And pressure is the key word here, because police interactions involving firearms are pressure environments on both sides of the window. Officers are trained to assume worst-case scenarios until proven otherwise. Gun owners are often trained in legal rights, but not in communication under stress. That mismatch creates friction. Now let's go deeper into the psychology of what officers are actually scanning for. They are watching your hands more than your face. Hands tell intention. Hands reach, pause, hesitate, twitch. A face can lie under stress, but hands often reveal urgency before words catch up. They are listening for inconsistencies. If you say you're carrying but hesitate when asked where, that gap matters more than the answer itself. Not legally, but tactically. They are also assessing compliance speed. Not blind obedience, but predictability. Someone who calmly follows instructions without sudden movements signals control. Someone who rushes to comply too quickly can also be suspicious because it might indicate panic or concealment. That is why gun owners sometimes feel confused after interactions. They did everything right legally but still felt tension, because legality is only one layer of the encounter. Safety perception is another. Now consider open carry versus concealed carry. Open carry changes the equation immediately because the firearm is already visible. There is no reveal moment, no surprise. The officer knows from the first glance. But concealed carry introduces uncertainty. The officer has to determine whether there is a firearm, where it is, and how it is positioned relative to their approach path. Uncertainty is what drives most of the cautious behavior people misinterpret as suspicion. Now bring in lawful transport rules. A gun locked in a case in the trunk under federal travel protections might still be treated differently in practice depending on state and local enforcement attitudes. Some officers are very familiar with interstate transport protections under federal law. Others may still ask questions simply to confirm compliance and ensure there is no immediate accessibility risk. And here's where many lawful carriers make a subtle but serious mistake. They over-explain. They start narrating their entire legal justification. It's unloaded, locked, I have a permit, I'm just traveling from, and so on. In their mind, they are being helpful. In reality, they are adding layers of information that were not requested, which sometimes introduces confusion instead of clarity. The safest communication is often the simplest. Direct answers to direct questions. No more, no less. Let's talk about glove compartments for a moment, because this is a classic point of misunderstanding. An officer asking about what's in the glove box is not always phishing. Sometimes it's a safety measure because that compartment is one of the most common locations for firearms in vehicles. A sudden reach toward that area, even for paperwork, can be misread if communication is unclear. There have been countless stops where a driver reaches too quickly, realizes the misunderstanding, freezes, and the situation spikes instantly. Not because anyone was doing something illegal, but because timing and expectation didn't match. Now imagine adding nervous laughter, shaky hands, or conflicting answers on top of that. It's not hard to see how quickly control can slip away from the driver's perspective. And here's something most firearm owners are never told clearly enough. Police are not just reacting to what you say. They are reacting to how consistent your behavior is with your words. If you say you are calm but your movements are erratic, they trust behavior more than speech. If you say you are armed but cannot clearly state location or status, they treat that as uncertainty. If you comply but do so in a rushed, unpredictable way, they slow everything down to regain control. This is not personal. It is procedural survival logic. Now let's return to those 5 words again, because they matter in a very specific context. I do not consent to searches. Not shouted, not argued, not used as a challenge, simply stated when necessary, calmly, clearly, and without emotional escalation. What it does is prevent accidental permission. It preserves legal standing. It ensures that if a search happens, it is based on lawful authority, not confusion or pressure. But here's the part people often miss. Those words are not a shield for confrontation. They are a boundary for clarity. And how you say them matters just as much as saying them. Because the worst mistake a gun owner can make in these situations is turning a legal interaction into an emotional one. Once emotions take over, everything becomes harder to manage. Officers become more cautious. The driver becomes more defensive. Small misunderstandings turn into big delays. And delays in a firearm-related stop are not neutral. They are interpreted as uncertainty, and uncertainty extends the stop. There are cases where everything was perfectly legal, but tone alone extended an interaction from minutes to nearly an hour because both sides lost sync. Now step back and look at the broader pattern. Most problems in armed police encounters do not come from illegal possession. They come from communication breakdowns under stress. A nervous driver speaks too quickly. An officer interprets urgency as instability. A misunderstanding about a firearm location leads to precautionary control measures. A consent question is answered without realizing its legal weight. And suddenly, a routine stop becomes something far more complicated than it needed to be. There is one more reality that rarely gets discussed openly. Officers remember stops where firearms were involved, not always the details, but the emotional tone. Calm, cooperative encounters often end quickly and are mentally filed as routine. Chaotic or uncertain encounters stick longer in memory, which can influence how similar future stops are approached. That doesn't mean anyone is judged unfairly. It means human memory under stress works in patterns. So when someone says, "I did everything right, but it still felt tense," that feeling is real. It reflects how layered these interactions actually are. As more states shift laws around concealed carry, constitutional carry, and duty to inform requirements, the burden increasingly falls on individual gun owners to understand not just what is legal, but how those laws translate into real-world human interaction under pressure. Because legality is one thing, execution under stress is another. And that gap is where most avoidable problems live. There's a reason experienced carriers often speak less during stops unless spoken to directly. Not because they are hiding anything, but because they understand that unnecessary words can introduce unnecessary complexity. And complexity is what increases risk in already sensitive situations. So when you hear that phrase again, those 5 words that circulate quietly among seasoned carriers, understand it is not about defiance. It is about preventing accidental surrender of control in moments where clarity matters more than politeness or panic. I do not consent to searches. 5 simple words that exist in the middle of a much larger truth. That in a police encounter involving firearms, what protects you most is not volume, not speed, not explanation, but controlled communication under pressure when every instinct in your body is telling you to either over-explain or shut down completely. And the next time you imagine that flashing light in your rearview mirror or that calm voice asking about weapons at your side window, it won't just be about what you legally carry. It will be about how well you can hold your position mentally while everything around you is designed to test your composure in ways most people never think about until they're already there.